The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled into the drive of Blackwood Academy. It was a monolith of Gothic architecture and prestige. At 28, I was the youngest principal in the school's history, stepping into shoes left behind by a man who had vanished under the vague cloud of health reasons. My predecessor, Dr. Sterling, had been the face of Blackwood for decades, and his sudden departure was the only blemish on a record of absolute perfection. As I walked through the iron gates, the silence was what struck me first. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a library. It was a pressurized clinical stillness. Students moved in synchronized lines, their uniforms pressed to razor-sharp edges, their faces devoid of the chaotic energy usually found in teenagers. The faculty were no different. When the vice principal greeted me in the foyer, her smile felt like a mask, polished and practiced. Every word she spoke seemed to follow an invisible script, a choreography of professional warmth that never reached her eyes. My new office was a cathedral of dark wood and leather. In the center sat a massive mahogany desk that looked like it had been carved from a single ancient tree. It felt heavy with secrets. As I settled into the high-backed chair, a strange curiosity took hold of me. While exploring the desk's structure, my fingers brushed against a small, serrated latch hidden beneath the rim of the bottom drawer. It didn't belong to the key I had been given. With a sharp click, a hidden compartment slid open, revealing a leather-bound journal. It wasn't a ledger of budgets or curriculum plans. Instead, it was a frantic log of discrepancies. Page after page detailed scholarship students, bright, ambitious kids from the city's poorest neighborhoods, who had supposedly transferred mid-semester. The notes were scrawled in a shaky hand, questioning the legitimacy of their exit interviews. There were dates, names, and the repeated phrase, "Subjects moved for optimization." My thoughts were interrupted by a commotion outside the main gates. Looking through the tall window, I saw a woman, distraught and disheveled, arguing with the security guards. Her name was Sarah. She was screaming for her son, Leo, a boy who had earned a full ride to Blackwood just a year ago. When I went out to meet her, the guards tried to usher me away, but her eyes, red from weeping, locked onto mine. She begged me to help her, claiming she hadn't heard a word from Leo in weeks. The school's official stance was that he was on a silent retreat, a traditional period of deep study, but a mother's intuition told her otherwise. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Her desperation was a jagged contrast to the curated peace of the campus. I hadn't been back in my office for 5 minutes before the door swung open without a knock. Mr. Thorne, the chairman of the board, stood there, radiating an aura of cold authority. He didn't ask about Sarah or the disturbance. Instead, he placed a heavy linen envelope on my desk. Inside was a welcome bonus check for an amount that made my stomach turn, more money than I would earn in 3 years. He spoke in low, measured tones about the importance of maintaining the school's reputation, and suggested that my time would be better spent focusing on the upcoming Ivy League applications rather than digging through old student files. His message was clear. My silence was being bought before I even knew what I was being asked to hide. That night, unable to sleep, I retreated to the security room. I pulled up the footage from the night Leo was last seen. The camera showed him walking down a corridor near the north wing, a section of the school that had been cordoned off for asbestos removal. He wasn't alone. The school nurse, her face pale and expressionless, was leading him by the arm. They stepped into the shadows of the north wing. I waited for hours, scrubbing through the footage of every other camera on campus, but Leo never came back out. On the screen, the nurse emerged alone 20 minutes later, adjusting her gloves, leaving the boy behind in a wing that was supposed to be empty. The silence of Blackwood Academy at midnight was different than it was during the day. It wasn't just clinical. It felt predatory. I left the bribe from Mr. Thorne untouched in my desk drawer, the paper weight of it a constant reminder of the price of my soul. Clad in dark clothes, I navigated the corridors, avoiding the sweeping beams of the perimeter security guards. The north wing loomed ahead, a skeleton of stone draped in plastic sheeting and "Danger Asbestos" signs. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The yellow tape fluttered in a draft that shouldn't have existed. Pushing through the heavy lead-lined doors, I expected the smell of dust and decay, but instead, the air was sharp, smelling of ozone and hospital-grade disinfectant. There was no asbestos here, only a corridor that grew cleaner and more modern the deeper I ventured. It was a sterile, windowless tunnel that seemed to stretch into the very heart of the campus hill. I reached a dead end where a heavy steel freight elevator sat flush against the wall. There were no buttons, only a sleek, glass biometric panel that glowed with a faint, pulsing blue light. It required a thumbprint. Digging into my pocket, I pulled out a small, flesh-colored slab of silicone. I had found it taped to the underside of the former principal's desk, a desperate insurance policy left behind by a man who knew his time was running out. It was a mold of Dr. Sterling's own thumb. I pressed the cold material against the scanner. For a terrifying heartbeat, the light turned red, then shifted to a welcoming green. The doors hissed open with a hydraulic sigh. I stepped inside, and the world dropped away. We weren't going up. We were descending deep beneath the foundations of the academy, into a realm that didn't exist on any blueprint I had studied. The elevator doors opened to a sprawling underground complex that looked more like a NASA facility than a school basement. White light spilled from every corner, blinding and sterile. I crept forward, passing through a transition chamber into a hall lined with glass-walled observation rooms. My breath hitched in my throat. This wasn't a school. It was a human farm. Inside the rooms, the missing scholarship students were seated in ergonomic chairs or lying on beds, their eyes wide and glazed, staring at monitors flickering with high-speed data. They were all hooked up to IV drips, a luminous blue substance pulsing through transparent tubes and into their veins. The air down here was cold, unnaturally so, carrying the metallic tang of liquid nitrogen. I moved past the first few rows of equipment, the hum of servers providing a low-frequency drone that vibrated in my teeth. The scale of the operation was staggering. It wasn't just a few students. It was dozens. I found Leo in the third room. He looked skeletal, his youthful face gaunt, his hand twitching in sync with the glowing liquid. This was the dark engine driving the elite status of the academy. Mr. Thorne and his board had turned a place of learning into a literal laboratory for the wealthy to harvest the potential of the poor. Blackwood's legendary 100% Ivy League acceptance rate wasn't a miracle. It was built on the broken minds of children who had no one to look for them. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking as I tried to record the scene. No signal. The emergency-only icon mocked me. I turned to run back to the elevator, but the doors were already open. The vice principal stood there, her professional mask gone, replaced by a look of cold disappointment. Behind her stood 3 armed security guards. "I hoped you were smarter than this," she whispered. "Mr. Thorne doesn't like loose ends." I backed away, my eyes darting to the room next to Leo's. Inside, Dr. Sterling was strapped to a cold chair. "He didn't retire," she sneered. "He became the experiment." The elevator hissed as it closed again, sealing me in this subterranean nightmare with the vice principal and her guards. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Moments later, the heavy doors slid open once more, and Mr. Thorne stepped out. His tailored suit a sharp contrast to the clinical horrors of the lab. He didn't look like a monster. He walked toward me with a calm, paternal grace that made my skin crawl. He gestured toward the rows of students hooked to the blue-veined drips, explaining the need for human evolution. He spoke of the greater good, claiming the data harvested from these scholarship students was the key to a medical breakthrough that would eradicate Alzheimer's forever. To him, Leo and the others were merely biological processors, a necessary sacrifice for the future of medicine. The ultimatum was simple. I could either accept the treatment myself, becoming a genius figurehead for Blackwood, or I could join Dr. Sterling in the observation cells. Looking at the former principal's hollow expression, I knew I couldn't fight directly. I forced my breathing to steady, casting my eyes down as if defeated. I told Thorne that if I were to lead this new era, I needed to understand the science. I requested access to the administrative logs to review the metrics. Thorne, fueled by arrogance and the belief that he had broken me, signaled the vice principal to let me sit at the central terminal. My fingers flew across the keyboard, but I wasn't looking at medical charts. I navigated the internal network with frantic speed. I found the main server directory, years of incriminating footage and financial trails. I initiated a recursive upload to a secure cloud drive I had prepared. A progress bar appeared, creeping forward with agonizing slowness. One of the security guards stepped closer, his brow furrowed as he watched the data packets fly. He realized too late what I was doing. As he reached for his holster, I lunged for the wall-mounted emergency fire suppression system and smashed the glass. The room was instantly swallowed by a thick, suffocating cloud of halon gas. The guards stumbled, their vision obscured. Using the chaos, I grabbed a heavy paperweight and smashed the glass partition of Leo's room. The boy was limp, his eyes rolling back as I ripped the IV from his arm. I threw his arm over my shoulder, the weight of his body nearly pulling me down. I couldn't go back to the elevator. I remembered the blueprints. There was a ventilation exhaust in the rear of the lab designed for chemical fumes. I dragged Leo into the dark, cramped shaft. We crawled through the dark for what felt like hours, the metal scraping my skin. When we finally kicked out a grate near the north wing's exterior, the night air hit me like a physical blow. But Thorne's security was already swarming the gates, their flashlights cutting through the mist like searchlights. They cornered us against the iron bars, weapons drawn and eyes cold. I held my phone up, watching the final 1% of the upload flicker. Just as a guard stepped forward to seize us, my phone vibrated with a sharp notification. Upload complete. At that moment, the horizon was flooded with the rhythmic strobe of red and blue lights. The data had hit the servers of every major news outlet and the FBI simultaneously. The raid was swift. Blackwood Academy, the bastion of perfection, was dismantled in a single night. I sat on the back of an ambulance, a shock blanket around my shoulders, watching Sarah collapse into tears as she finally held Leo. The school was a metaphoric pyre, its reputation incinerated by the cold truth. But as I watched the investigators haul Mr. Thorne away, I looked down at my hand. It was shaking. I remembered the feeling of the chemical mist in the lab. My mind began to race, thoughts colliding at a speed that felt impossible. I had been exposed. The truth was out, but as my pulse quickened and my intellect surged into a terrifying new gear, I realized the cost was only beginning to be paid.